Welcome to Ultimate Brains. I'm your host Fiona, and today we have Leigh Oakley. Hi Leigh.
Hi Fiona.
And don't forget brains.
Hello Leigh. Hi Fiona.
So Leigh, it's all about writing a book. How do you find space to write?
Well, strangely Fiona, I didn't have any space until I actually retired. I think it's very, very important that when you are in a writing space that you're relaxed, and having a full-time job wasn't very conducive to that. But neither is I think what some people try to do is say they're going to take time off work to write a book. And so they save up some money and they decide, now is my time to write a book. And there's nothing worse than having financial pressure when you're trying to be creative. So I would advise anybody not to rely on it until you actually become successful. Keep an income going. And what I did was I decided to write once I'd retired. But even then, I'm not the kind of person that can be creative or concentrate if there's music going on or people in the household. So my space is always between 5 o'clock and 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Often in the dark, which I think helps my concentration. It helps with a little bit of the eerie things that I like to put in. So my space, that is it in those hours.
Wow.
Every day.
So you say that's when you write. How do you start? How do you find ideas for a book? Shall we just ask, what are the main genres of books, Brain?
Thinking. There are several main types of fiction, each distinguished by its unique characteristics and storytelling approaches. The main types of fiction include mystery, thriller, science fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, historical fiction, adventure, dystopian, realistic fiction, historical romance, horror, western, satire. These categories are not rigid, and many works may blend elements from multiple genres, creating subgenres or hybrid forms of fiction.
I've found when I've read your books, yours don't actually fit in any one of them categories, do they?
I think they're a bit of a cocktail of most of them, really.
Yeah.
A bit of an element. I think when I don't pick a genre, I think I pick an idea. And the idea develops, and the more it goes on, the more genres it will cross, I think. Yeah. And that's how I...
So how do you pick your idea, your first initial idea?
An idea will come to me at the most strange times. It could be just a conversation with friends, or I could be just out having a moment to myself, and I'll look across water and think, oh, what if this happened, and what if that happened? And then I'll build on that. And once I get something bit between my teeth, I'm off, and I'll think, you know, where's it going to go, how's it going to end, and the plot will come from that.
I can imagine it's addictive as well. When you get in there, it's addictive. But how do you plan? So you've got the idea in your head. How do you plan your writing process?
I usually start off with a rough plan. I'll have an opening and how I want it to end, and roughly the story in between. But I think what you've got to be careful of is that you don't stick rigidly to your original plan. Because what I've found is when I'm in the middle of writing something, another avenue opens up. And when an avenue opens up and you follow it, more avenues open up. So the end product may be nothing like the idea I first had, although it's loosely based on that.
But it might be 100 times stronger because you've followed your passion, your ideas, mightn't it?
I've never regretted the outcome and thought, well, I didn't stick to the plot, but I found something much, what I think is much better than the original idea I had.
Yeah, and I presume you might reserve them ideas for another time, another book.
Oh yes, I'll park them and then find they'll slot in somewhere else further along the line on a completely different novel.
Yeah. Have you ever... People have said about AI. Have you ever used AI in writing? Can we just ask Brain, could you use AI to write a book?
Thinking. Yes, books are being written with the assistance of AI. Some authors and researchers use AI tools to generate content, assist in plot development, or even collaborate in the writing process. However, it's important to note that while AI can be a helpful tool, the creative and conceptual aspects of writing still largely depend on human input. AI-generated books were not as prevalent as those created entirely by humans, but the field was evolving.
I do think that AI is the new thing, isn't it? I mean, it's happening in music, in videos. You know, you don't really need a musician anymore, and you don't need a writer anymore.
But
so
we
they say.
do. We
Because-
absolutely do.
And sorry, brain, to insult you, but I think the thing is with AI, it can only go so far because AI is learning from experience.
Yes.
And the one thing that it can never replace will be the imagination, the human imagination. And that will always be prevalent, I think, in novel writing. And if it isn't, I mean, AI could quite easily cobble together a typical romance.
Yes.
You know, boy meets girl, boy hates girl, girl hates boy, and then something happens and they get married. I mean, they could churn them out time after time, but there's, you know, not many people want
Not
to
gonna be the
continually read that same old story. So I think imagination is something that it can never replace.
Yeah. And like you say, life experience, and that is what Ultimate Brains is all about, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's about combining the brain, the facts, with the experience and the wisdom.
Yeah.
What research do you do when you're writing a book? I presume, well, I've read I've read all her books and they're amazing. But what research do you do when you're writing a book?
You've got to be very, very careful on research. You've got to do lots and lots of research, particularly if you're picking a time period that isn't current. Readers, they know it's fiction. They know it's the biggest lie around. They know that it's just made up, but they still would feel very insulted if you make a mistake, and it would reflect very badly on you. So you do find yourself wanting to set something in the 60s, 70s or 80s, and you find yourself saying, oh, well, when did mobile phones come out? When did texting start? When did Facebook start? When did the pound coin come in? Who was in power? What government was it? All that research is fundamental if you're going to write, and you might only touch on it in a passing comment, but a reader will pick up on it. A reader will definitely pick up on it, and they will feel offended and insulted by the fact that you've not done your research.
As a reader, you don't appreciate that, do you? You read the book and you're so engrossed in it, but like you say, you're creating that picture. You don't appreciate all that work that's gone into that.
No.
But when you start writing your book, how do you choose the opening for the book?
Oh, the openings, that's a killer, because you try and get something in the opening that grabs somebody's emotion, I think, whether the emotion is horror, fear, intrigue, or it's sentimental. You've got to pull a reader in. I mean, I'm one of those people, and I'm sure you've done the same, Fiona, when you start flicking through Netflix and you look at all the openings and you get 2 minutes into it, you think, this isn't for me. And if it isn't compelling enough to keep you, and particularly if you're not in the right mood, you'll just put a book down, just as you would flick onto the next Netflix thing and say, well, you know, that didn't grab me. So you've got to have something that makes them want to know what happened next, why was that happening, why did she say that? And so the opening is fundamental to getting the reader hooked in.
I can honestly say I've not been a big reader throughout my life, but you got me back into reading.
Oh, thank you.
And I have found that I have picked up other books, and it's almost like it's too much effort to read. It's too complicated. I've got to figure things out, whereas yours just flows, and I want to read the next book, even though they're so different. They all have that knack of engaging.
I think it's a fine balance between keeping the reader engaged, and you do put hooks in, we all put hooks in. You know, it's like somebody saying, you know, what she didn't realise is this was the last time she would ever see him alive. That's going to be a hook, because people think, what happened to him? But I think you've also got to be careful that you don't create too many characters looking the same or different, with so many, you know, random names. And quite often I've done that, and I'm looking back through a book saying, who was he, who was she? And I think the main reason you can keep those people alive is I try to, every character, I base it on somebody I know. So I don't forget the hair colour, I don't forget how big they were or how small they were. Once you've done that and found somebody you know and given it a different name, it all becomes clearer to you and to the reader.
I'm intrigued to find out which character I will become.
Or you may have already been.
I'm going to reread them again now. That gives me a perfect excuse. So you've told us how you keep your readers engaged by creating hooks to tie them in.
Yeah.
How do you write an ending then? You've got to come to a point, haven't you, where they can't go on and on and on, because people will only read a certain size book, I presume. So how do you wind it up?
Well, you can either make it into a series, which I have done, as you know, on 2 occasions, well, 3 occasions I've got series. But when you actually come to the end, which quite often I've done, and readers have said, don't make that the end, can you do another one? Because I don't want it to end there. Yeah. But I think a reader has to, people like to leave it on an abrupt ending or a shocking ending, which happens, you know, and it does in films. But I think once you've done that and given the shock or the ending or the twist to the end, you've still got to then go back and appease the reader. They want to know how did that affect all the characters and wind it all up. And I think you've got to leave the reader thinking that was a good ending because even this happened, that happened. You tied up all the loose ends. And you see the same in a film, don't you? You don't want to just see somebody getting caught for something. You want to see the outcome and how he got taken to prison. You've got to finish it off. Yeah, and I think that's a difficult one. I sometimes struggle with that.
Yeah. So here's your books down here. Yeah. So we look at these, and you've got beautiful images. How important is it for a title and a book cover? Yeah.
Well, they do say, don't they, you can't judge a book by its cover, but people do. People definitely judge it by the cover. That was the second cover idea I had for that one. I actually republished it because I think you've got to try and sell the book or bring somebody in. So you've got to represent what it is. And you do the same thing on Netflix. You see the picture first, don't you? Yeah. And then you say, oh, it's got a gun, that must be a murder, or it's got a dead body or whatever. But on this one, this is a love to die for. And I think looking at this one, what I tried to convey was, here's a woman who, you know, seriously looks like she would die for the love. And then there's a mystery man. And I'm hoping that will give the idea that she's in love with somebody who's a little bit elusive. Yeah. And so hopefully it will draw somebody, and they won't be disappointed because you are conveying what's inside. It's like a bar of chocolate, isn't it? You want to taste it inside and it needs to represent itself on the outside.
And you want to be intrigued, don't you? A love to die for. You are intrigued. You want to find out a bit more. Yeah. So that's brilliant. So there's two questions, aren't there? People have decided they're going to write a book. You've given them a lot of facts about how to go about it, how to put things in it. But do you self-publish or don't you? It's a bit like, can we just ask Brain, what is the success rate of people writing their own books being published?
Thinking. The percentage of books that get published can vary widely and is influenced by several factors, including the genre, market trends, and the quality of the manuscripts submitted. Traditional publishing houses often receive a large number of submissions, and only a fraction of them are ultimately chosen for publication. Estimates for the acceptance rate of traditional publishing houses typically range from about 1% to 5%. This means that only a small percentage of the manuscripts submitted to these publishers are accepted and go on to be published.
I think now with the way things are, and like I've learnt from you, it's not the only way to go, is it?
No. And I think from what Brain said there about, you know, it's 1 in 100, when you get into the fiction genre, it's more like 1 in 1,000. Submitting to a publishing house is a difficult process in itself because you need to write a cover letter, which needs to be snappy, and it needs to say, selling yourself, why you've done it, why they should pick you. And then you have to write the synopsis. And the synopsis can't be like this, it can't be a hook or something to get them intrigued. They're not interested. They want to know the whole plot, how it ends. You can't hold anything back, and then they'll decide whether they think they can sell that or not. You've also, when you go to a publishing house, you've got to make sure that they are actually publishing your genre, and they're not, it's no good sending a murder mystery off to somebody who does, children's nursery rhymes or something. And then when you get within them, you've got to find the right editor because they all have their own genres as well.
Wow.
And then you'll find that they will say they'll have maybe 40 or 50 in their inbox on every day, and they don't read the whole thing. They literally read the cover letter, the synopsis, and very rarely will actually pick up the manuscript itself if it's not of interest. When you look at things like Harry Potter, that was turned down by 11 publishing houses.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, have you got the momentum and the self-confidence and the time to put in that much? Because you need to be sending off. I think I read somewhere where it said, if you are sending off a manuscript, you need to be sending off your manuscript at least 3 times a week to someone.
Oh my goodness.
And it could take years and years if it ever comes to anything. So
and how it must be so deflating as well. You've took the time out of your life, you've found the time to write that book, And then, like you say, you're trying to sell yourself. You're trying to sell your soul almost, aren't you? And not only that, but you've got to refine that into such a brief
Small,
outline,
yes.
which is a skill in
Yes.
itself. So how did you go about it?
Well, I decided that, having reached retirement age before I started writing, I didn't have that many years to put into waiting for a publishing house. So I decided to go down the self-publishing route. And Amazon, which I chose as the way forward, make it very easy. And if you say how much does it cost to self-publish, it used to be between £5,000 and £10,000 to get your first books out there. With Amazon, it's completely free. So you've got to put some work in. You've got to do your cover design, which, as we said, is very important. You've got to lay out your page numbering, your copywriting. You've got to put it, the pages, the titles, how many pages. You've got to work out how much it's going to cost to print it. And then you have to do your covers, your spine and the margins and things. There's quite a lot of work to go into it. But in the end, you do end up with a physical book that can make you some money and that you can pass on to friends, relatives, and of course it's there as an inheritance to your children.
And I think you absolutely succeeded. Well, that's absolutely brilliant. I do feel like we might have to have another interview going more in detail about how you go about this, because I think it's something people don't tend to know about.
Yeah.
But I will say it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, Leigh. And we'll say bye from me and bye from Brain.
Thank you.
Goodbye.